10 things you should do when building in Minecraft. In addition to learning about a lot of my bad building habits over the years, I've also picked up some good ones. You know, like the little tips and tricks that the pro Minecrafters are doing right now, but aren't always immediately obvious. Hopefully these can help you up your building game just like they've helped mine. Oh, and by the way, big shoutouts to Alexis, what a homie, thank you for the video suggestion. Number 1, consider erosion and natural forces. As you can see, we're revisiting my tropical island build that I put together a few months ago. It's still definitely one of my favorite builds that I've made up until this point. Anyways, the reason that we're here is actually not for the buildings themselves, but rather for this mountain right here. You can see that it's kind of just like a big lump, you know, it's very soft and rounded. There aren't really any big jagged edges. It's not very tall compared to what you'd normally think of when you think of a mountain. And then for a little bit of contrast, let's take a look at these guys right here. Just giving these two a little bit of a side by side, you can really see the difference in the shape and the style and the color, right? Like the 7 Quick Tips Mountains are super tall, they're super jagged, they've got snow on the top, and the tropical one is really just kind of small and rounded and lumpy. And of course, this is all due to erosion. Specifically, I'm talking about wind and rain erosion here. You know, you're going to get a lot more of that in a warm and humid environment like this one. It's so very important when you're making organic builds like mountains or caves or doing terraforming of some kind that you really take into account the fact that water and wind just cut through things over time, right? Like they level mountains, they hollow out caves. If you have some sort of like underground aquifer or river running through an environment like this, it's going to slowly make like a ridge in the rock and just create a deeper and deeper groove as it passes from a higher up area to a lower down area. Keep this stuff in mind. It's really going to ramp up the realism and it's going to help your builds a lot. Number 2, when mixing textures, avoid total randomness. Okay, so this is actually something I don't see a lot of people doing, which to be honest is a big shame because, well, it's really not that complicated, but it's going to really improve your build. So hear me out, guys. In front of me here, I've got like an example road, right? Like just a regular gray stone road, and I'm gonna be using this to demonstrate how if you put a little bit of thought into your texture mixing as opposed to just doing randomness, it can really improve the way your structures look. So of course it's just stone right now, but I'm gonna go ahead and fill this up with a completely randomly textured gray block palette. And yeah, you know, it definitely looks better than just using stone or just using stone bricks or whatever. Let's think again about what we just talked about in tip number 1, right? Erosion. Things get worn out over time, right? Like stone bricks will eventually kind of wear out and smooth down into something that looks a little bit more like stone. And this time around, we're not really talking about natural erosion, but we're more so talking about foot traffic. I think it's pretty safe to say that most people who walk down this path would be walking down the middle, not straddling one edge like this. So why don't we give this texturing another shot, a version 2 if you will, with a little bit more thought in mind behind where we're putting our textures. And I would say that that looks quite a bit better. Even though we're using all of the same exact textures, this really does feel a lot more like a road that people have been walking on, because out of the edges here you can see like more remnants of the original style of the road, but then in the middle everything's kind of just all worn out and blended together, you know? This road is now really showing its age, and I think that's really cool. Number 3, ruin your builds the right way. And so when I say the right way to ruin builds, what I mean is that if you want to make a build that looks like this, you know, old and crumbling and nature taking over and stuff's falling apart, what you really ought to do is build up the entire thing in its unruined state first, and then go back and ruin it. Unless you have like a super crystal clear picture of what the original build is supposed to look like, it really does help to build up the entire thing first. I know it's going to take extra time and extra materials, and if you're building in survival especially, that can be a bit of a pain, but seriously, follow this advice. It is really great advice. Trust me on this one, guys. Like when I was ruining this, one of the main things that I kind of destroyed the most were these like horizontal bits here, because I figured that over the thousands of years that this was sitting around, some of these connector bits might have fallen apart, and these parts that are not really supported by a large pillar probably just kind of fell to the ground. So you can see here there's like a whole thing missing, and over here there's another like in between connector bit missing on both sides, and this part is missing a half, and really you're kind of just simulating natural erosion forces by ruining your builds the way nature intended, I guess. So in the end, you're going to have a more realistic build. Number 4, use armor stands, banners, and item frames. If you use armor stands, banners, and item frames to their fullest potential, they become insane for decoration. Over here at this little control panel here, I've got like a big red button that you can actually go ahead and press. Over on our big TV set here, where I'm keeping track of our random hardcore worlds, you can see I've got these black concretes inside the item frame on top of a note block, kind of like speakers. As for banners, I'm using them kind of like curtains over here. You can see we got this cool little stripey pattern. There's something like millions and millions of different banner combinations, so obviously I can't show you all of them. But in particular, I've always really liked using banners as curtains. I think the texture and the material is very spot on, especially if you use a stripe pattern like this, and it's just another really great piece of interior decor. I don't know about you guys, but making chairs that actually look good has always been one of the toughest things for me in Minecraft interior design. But here's where armor stands can really come in handy. Check this out. I've got 4 armor stands around this table, and they make a really good little chair. Obviously, they're not functional. You can just walk right through it. I'll put a quick little replay on screen right now, just showing you guys how I was able to construct these guys right here. It's really not that difficult. It doesn't take very much time. All you need is a little bit of extra redstone to get everything into place. And yeah, I highly recommend this leather helmet on top of the armor stand submerged into the ground tactic. And because they're leather helmets, you can make them basically whatever color you want. Number 5, add sturdiness. In my opinion, a build looks sturdy when you've put some thought into the amount of reinforcement and support that would actually be needed to make the build like stand up in real life. I know that was kind of just like a weird word soup. My brain is not totally working too good today. It's a little bit of a slow brain evening, unfortunately. We are here to show off how I was using sturdiness to make this starter base look better. Take a good look at how the columns are, right? Like I've got really frequent columns, and I've got all of the actual wall bits like inset by a block. You can see the wall isn't out here where the wood is. It's pushed in by a block. And the same thing applies up here too with the wooden planks and whatnot. They're all pushed in by a block. Now, a lot of people, of course, do use columns in their builds as a pretty common Minecraft trope in building. But the important thing is that if you have enough of them and you outset them like this and you have them actually support something, like in this case, they're supporting the roof and they're supporting the roof over here too, they can really add some good realism to your build because it really looks like they're holding up something. Flying on over to my bridge that I put together a bit later in the series, you can see how I've got a whole lot of support here too. We have this top layer that you actually walk down, but then there's this entire bottom section with not only these big birch beams that just go across the entire thing at a very cool little arc, but you've got all these little tiny in-between ones too made out of spruce that are connecting the top area to the bottom area. If you keep sturdiness and real weight and gravity in mind, it's going to help a whole lot. Number 6, strategically placing light. A couple updates back, they changed the light level required for mobs to spawn from level 7 all the way down to level 0. Nowadays, you can be a lot more careful with where you put your light, create some really cool, moody, dim lighting and atmospherics, and still prevent spawning. This is just one quick example of how you can use light to really separate different areas of a build. Like I've got this entire section here at the bottom that's very much shrouded in darkness, and then you've got this lighter, more vibrant upper section with the sandstone and the light textures as well as the actual light blocks. Now, of course, if I had mob spawning turned on, you definitely get a lot of mob spawns down here, but my point is that you can get a lot more creative. Like right here, I've got a dimly lit hallway and then some redstone lamps that kind of just randomly flicker on and off, and I think it has a really cool, like, creepy, spooky kind of vibe to it, you know? I just thought this is a cool little example of how you could use light to your advantage to really ramp up the amount of atmosphere in your build, especially if the light is flickering. Number 7, add in some motion. Now this tip is pretty much directly coming from like human psychology. And what I mean by that is, well, humans are naturally drawn to motion. Whenever something's moving, you have a tendency to look at it. We just cannot help but focus on things that are moving, especially when they're moving rapidly. Okay, I'll stop, I'm sorry. Behind me, I've got a collection of most of the moving things in the game. I'm sure I missed a few, but here are some really great, like surefire ways to add more motion into your builds. If you can think of a good way to incorporate moving pistons or something like that into your builds, maybe you're making a factory, or this is a really great way of just catching the eye a little bit more. You know, redstone dust lights up, pistons move, fluids such as lava and water, and particle effects like smoke are another great way as well. Don't forget that you can put items in water and have them move up or down or all over the place. Mobs are, of course, a great source of movement. You can't necessarily control their movements, but it's a really nice way of just adding a little bit more life. Same thing applies to minecarts. And behind me here, I've got a collection of, once again, some but not all of the blocks in Minecraft that are stationary blocks, but they do exhibit some moving qualities. To be honest, I don't remember if this is a resource pack thing or not, but the seagrass, I believe, naturally moves underwater like this in vanilla Minecraft. Banners will gently sway in the wind. Stone cutters have that little buzzy saw thing on the top. Sculk sensors kind of fiddle around a lot. Sculk blocks gently pulsate and twinkle a little bit if you watch them over time. Prismarine actually also slowly changes color over time. It's kind of hard to notice, but if we speed up this footage here, you can see it's gonna shift its color. And of course, spore blossoms emit those cool little green particles. Point is, there are some really interesting, tiny little ways to inject little bits of motion into your builds. And psychologically speaking, which sounds really weird to say, but they will have some meaningful, tangible improvements on your finished product. Number 8, consider perspective and sightlines. You can have the coolest, the largest, the most mega build in the entire world, but if everything is kind of just oddly placed in front of each other and there's no rhyme or reason to the position of all the different elements, then it's not gonna look too great. When you're building a base in survival, you'll probably have some sort of nether portal nearby, and this nether portal is probably where most people are going to be viewing your build from. So not only take into account the position of the nether portal, you know, put your portal in a good spot, but also once you have in mind a specific angle that you want your build to be viewed at, for example, this Japanese build from my old video has to really be viewed from this angle. Make sure that all the elements that you want to be visible right away are visible and that they look good from this perspective. I mean, this is a pretty obvious example, but if we go ahead and look at the build from, say, over here, you can't even see the majority of the stuff that's in this landscape. From the back, this build just looks unfinished. And from the right side here, you do get a cool little view of this gate, which isn't actually visible from the front, but then also the trees are blocking all the cool structures back there. So it's not really optimal either. Don't be ashamed if your build looks weird from a different direction. Just try and make sure that from its intended direction, the build looks as good as possible. Number 9, use an eye-catching accent color. Much like what I was talking about a couple tips ago, the human eye is drawn to bright, vibrant colors just as much, if not more so, than it's drawn to motion. So when you're making your Minecraft builds, really make sure that you have at least 1 or 2 eye-popping accent colors. I see a lot of people just totally neglecting this step when they're making their Minecraft builds, and I kind of get it, right? A lot of the blocks that have the most customization options are texture blending options, grays for stone and browns for all the different kinds of dirt and mud and stuff. They don't really have a lot of vibrance. They're very desaturated, they're very muted, they're kind of dull even. As cool as this build is behind me from my 7 quick tips video on underwater builds, there isn't really an accent color, right? We got white and we got the cyan from the prismarine, and that's kind of it. Now, of course, if you're trying to mimic something in the real world like mountains, you don't necessarily need to follow this rule as much. I mean, these mountains are pretty bland, but that's because they're trying to look like real life mountains. But if your build isn't necessarily following the conventions of real life, don't forget to add in some accent colors. Even though red is a vibrant color here, it becomes the background color just because there's so much of it. And anything that's not red really stands out more. If we compare the mushrooms to these weird little trees here, I mean, these are mostly gray and brown besides red, and these are mostly purple and white. Those are going to stand out so much more, even if the trees are actually larger. Number 10, reference images. Now, I know I say this in a lot of my videos, 7 quick tips videos, other ones like this and stuff, but oh my god, this is genuinely the most helpful thing I've ever done to improve my building game. Back when I first started building, you learn a lot from YouTubers, if you watch Hermitcraft or Empires, or maybe you watch some solo builder channels like that, like me, It's not always entirely obvious that people are using reference images and planning out stuff beforehand and coming up with schemes, and you kind of just assume that people are building things like on the spot, just completely off the cuff. And that just could not be further from the truth, guys. Reference images and plans and creative mode sketches are so fundamentally instrumental to all of my builds. I basically sketch out every single build I make, whether it's for 7 quick tips or random hardcore or survival or whatever. I sketch out basically everything. And I guarantee you that like at least 90% of other YouTubers do that too, especially the big ones, trust me. Simply going on Google and finding something that looks kind of like what you want your build to be in Minecraft is insanely helpful for proportion, getting little bits of inspiration, knowing where to start. You know, starting builds is insanely difficult, and I totally understand that. Having a reference image is going to make that easier too. If there's one thing, one piece of advice that you guys take away from this video, one thing that you start doing, please let it be reference images. And with that, guys, thank you so much for sticking around to the end of the video. I really appreciate it. You guys are honestly really cool. It means a lot, seriously. If you enjoyed the video, of course, don't forget to leave a like down below. And if you are not subscribed, consider doing that as well. I'd really appreciate it. Until next time, my dudes, this has been Leon, and I'll see you all in the next building tips video. Take care, my friends.